Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to tackle a word you've probably heard a lot, maybe in debates, maybe online, the dialectic. Now, it's usually sold as this really smart way to figure out history and solve problems. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if there's another side to this story? Let's dig in.
The source material we're looking at kicks things off with this really provocative line, calling the dialectic a magical formula. Right away, that tells you we're not just talking about a simple discussion technique. A formula suggests it's a process with a very specific power, a method built to get a certain result. So that begs the question, right? What is this formula, and what's it really doing?
Okay, so before we can even get into the critique, we've got to be on the same page. Let's break down the textbook version first. What are we actually talking about when someone brings up the dialectic?
So at its heart, it's a way to work through opposing ideas. Think of it like this. You start with one idea, a proposition, which we call the thesis. Then you bring in the complete opposite of that idea, the antithesis. And the idea is that the clash between these two gets resolved into something new, something called a synthesis. And this synthesis is supposed to be a higher level of truth, taking the best from both sides.
Let's just walk through that one more time. You've got your thesis. That's your starting point. Then comes the antithesis. That's the big challenge, the opposite force. And finally, out of that conflict, you get the synthesis, which smooths everything over. When you lay it out like that, it seems super logical, right? Almost like a natural law for how ideas grow. A really clean, simple path from A to B to C. But, and this is the big pivot point, is it really just an open search for the truth? The sources we're pulling from ask a really crucial question here. Is this process an honest, open-ended journey, or is there something else going on under the surface? And that question is what kicks off this entire critique. All right, so this brings us to the absolute core of the critique. The argument from our sources is this. The dialectic isn't always this neutral, objective tool for discovery. Instead, they say it can be used as a strategic tool for deception, a method designed not to find the truth, but to create a very specific desired version of it.
To make this point, the sources use a really powerful analogy. Think of a puppeteer. A puppeteer isn't just watching a story unfold, right? No, they're controlling every single move to tell a story they've already written. The argument here is that the dialectic can work the exact same way. The person who gets to define the initial problem, the thesis, and its opposition, the antithesis, is basically the puppeteer, controlling the whole show from the very beginning.
And they offer another great analogy, a casino. How does a casino work? Well, it sets up games where, over time, the house is guaranteed to win. It's a rigged system. The suggestion is that the dialectic can be just like that. If you get to set the terms of the game, if you choose the thesis and the antithesis, you can rig the outcome so that the synthesis always lands on your preferred conclusion. The house always wins. So really, it all boils down to this. Who gets to decide what the antithesis is? Think about science. In science, you have a hypothesis, and you test it against real, measurable, objective data. But what this critique is saying is that in the dialectic, the antithesis isn't something you discover through data. It's something you choose. It's a subjective interpretation. And if you're choosing it with a specific agenda in mind, well, the whole process is biased from the word go.
Okay, let's follow that thread because it leads right to the next big point from the sources. This whole idea that the antithesis is chosen, well, it suggests the whole process is teleological. Now, that's a bit of a $5 word, but all it really means is that it's goal-oriented. The destination is already decided before the journey even begins.
And if you want examples, look no further than the two biggest names tied to the dialectic, Hegel and Marx. Both of them saw history as a process moving toward a specific, final endpoint. For Hegel, the end of the line was absolute knowledge, a kind of ultimate spiritual and philosophical unity. For Marx, the destination was communism, a society with no classes and no state. The point is, for both of these thinkers, the dialectic wasn't some infinite, open-ended chat. It was a train on a track, heading to one specific station.
And this quote from the source material just nails the argument down perfectly. It basically says the whole process starts with the end goal already in mind. Everything after that, the thesis, the antithesis, the synthesis, it's all just fashioned to make sure you arrive at that predetermined end. So it's not a tool for discovery, it's a tool for justification. It's about making an ideological conclusion look like a logical one.
The sources use a really sharp, almost brutal analogy to drive this home. Imagine a scientist being paid by a big tobacco company back in the day with the job of proving that cigarettes are safe. Is that scientist engaged in an open search for truth? Of course not. They're cherry-picking data to get to a conclusion that's already been paid for. The critique argues this is exactly how the dialectic can be abused. It's confirmation bias dressed up to look like a serious intellectual process.
So, if the destination is already plugged into the GPS, how do you make sure the car gets there? Well, according to the sources we're looking at, one of the most powerful steering wheels you have is language. It's about using words not just to describe what's happening, but to actually frame the debate in a way that guarantees your desired outcome.
A key word that gets highlighted here is problematize. Now, this doesn't just mean finding a problem and trying to fix it. In this context, it's about casting suspicion on everything, every tradition, every value, every institution, by interpreting it as a hidden system of power and oppression. It's a way of setting up the thesis as inherently flawed before the conversation even starts.
And the sources point to a whole set of terms they say are used in this way, not to foster a good faith debate, but to shut it down. The claim is that when you label something with a term like systemic racism or patriarchy, you're not just arguing against it anymore. You're branding it as fundamentally illegitimate. And how can you have a real dialogue with something you've already decided is completely invalid?
It really brings to mind this classic quote from George Orwell. The point being made by the sources is that when you start twisting language to control, to prejudge, to obscure the truth, you're not just having a dishonest debate. You are corrupting the very possibility of clear thought. And if you can't think clearly, you can't possibly reach an honest synthesis.
Okay, so this brings us to the big finale of the critique. If you accept that the dialectic can be used as a tool with a predetermined goal and that language is the weapon used to steer it, what's the endgame? I mean, what's the ultimate point of all this?
The sources are really direct about this. From their perspective, the goal of this process isn't to fix society. It's not about reform. It's about revolution. The idea is to relentlessly criticize, to problematize every single institution until people lose all faith in them. And once those foundations are gone, you've created the perfect conditions for a total revolution.
And according to this critique, it all boils down to one primary revolutionary goal, which the sources argue isn't some hidden secret. They point right to the end of the Communist Manifesto to back this up, where the authors openly declare that their goals can only be reached by, well, by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. And finally, the critique takes a huge step back, framing this whole thing in a much bigger, philosophical, even theological way. The argument they make is that this isn't just about modern politics. They see it as a reflection of a story that's as old as time, a fundamental desire to rebel against any and all established order. As they put it, it's a desire that goes all the way back to a fallen heart wanting to overthrow God and take ultimate authority for ourselves. And so all of this leaves us with a really big question to chew on. On one hand, the dialectic is a powerful way to think about how ideas clash and evolve. But, as this critique argues, any powerful tool can be pointed in different directions. So the question for you is, where do you draw the line? When does a helpful method for resolving conflict become a tool for controlling outcomes? When does a search for truth become a machine for manufacturing it? It's definitely something to think about, especially with everything going on in the world today. Thanks for tuning in.